Chair, we are live, so as soon as 1:30 hits, you can begin.
Chair, your double mute is on.
Thank you. Has anyone heard from Commissioner Treese?
I have not, but I have been in communication with Megan, and we will keep an eye out for her.
Okie dokie. So, welcome back to the afternoon session of the Washington County Board of Commissioners. Well, adding to the unique experiences of the last 2 years, we can add another one to the list with our brief internet outage there. So we'll turn now to the work session topic of economic trends and indicators. Thank you, Mr. Tapania, for being patient with us as we got things moved along. And to you, Mr. Jockers and Diane Taniguchi-Dennis. So welcome, everyone, and I'll turn it over to you now.
Good. Thank you very much, Chair and members of the Commission. For the record, my name is Mark Jockers. I'm the Chief of Staff with Clean Water Services. Thank you for an extra half hour for lunch. So I did get to take advantage of that. I'm here today to introduce John Tapania. John is a president with Eco Northwest, and I know he's familiar with the board. And he's been working with Clean Water Services in Washington County, specifically with your CFO, Jack Liang, and our CFO, Kathy Leader, to look at economic trends and indicators and measures as we've kind of traveled through the pandemic and the impacts on the economy that the pandemic's had. John helped both the Washington County Budget Committee and Clean Water Services Budget Committee quite literally a year ago next week. He spoke to the Washington County Budget Committee, and a year ago next month, he talked to Clean Water Services. He since came back and gave us kind of a picture of what was happening in November, and we have invited him back now again right before we start talking to our budget committees this year to kind of give us an update on the modeling and analysis of where the region stands today. So with that, I'm going to go over and hand it over to you, Mr. Tapania.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, commissioners. I feel as if we've sort of been on this journey together with these checkpoints, and I am happy it is not a year ago at this time. I mean, the news that I have to share now is much more hopeful, and knock on wood that it continues down that path. But if I had reported to you back in May of last year that we would have emerged, that unemployment would be where it is, and that we'd be this far into a vaccination campaign, while there are still many people suffering, this was among the better outcomes that anyone could have predicted at that time. So I'll, with that, start to move through the deck. I'm going to go ahead and advance. First and foremost, where do we stand on the public health front? Because throughout this period, if you wanted to know where the economy was headed, understanding where we were on public health was the most important. So let's keep going there. The first report is just very good news, that Washington County and Oregon both have relatively well performed on this public health challenge. That's 38.1 deaths per 100,000 residents, 58 for the state. That compares to 168 deaths per 100,000 for the nation as a whole. Obviously, there were some places early in this pandemic, New York, New Orleans, Detroit, others that just geographically and due to immigration and the nature of the virus, et cetera, were hit first and hard, et cetera. But after that, there was an awful lot of sort of government policy and collective behavior of residents that either did or didn't keep this virus relatively contained. And I would say that Washington County is among the places that has done the best in the country. And so let's hope we can finish strong in that regard. Next slide. Important piece to keep an eye on here, and you can get this for Washington County as well, is that, and this is sort of good news of the vaccine, is that you're starting to see a disconnect between the infections and the severity of people being put onto either ventilators or ICU beds. So this is Oregon level data, but you would see the same for Washington County. As we move through, you could see that big spike in infections in the late winter and into January, et cetera, that pulled up those ICU bed and ventilator numbers. Now, as you're sort of seeing this surge that we're dealing with right now with respect to infections, you don't get that same kind of pulling up to the same extent. That doesn't mean that we're ready to back off, but you're getting a different dynamic, and that is by and large due to the fact that we have an effective vaccination campaign, and we started with older residents who are at the most at risk of the most severe forms of this disease. Next slide. So where does the economy stand? We'll dive into some of that. Go to the next slide. Again, as these stories are very similar to the ones that I've been telling all along, and one of just deep concentration in particular parts of the economy. This is year-over-year change from March of last year to March of 2021. In particular, industrial sectors, and so by sort of no surprise to anybody here on this call, the big employment losses concentrated in the leisure and hospitality sector, the restaurants, the hotels, the entertainment venues, and the like. Still down 23% relative to their March levels. Local education, which in this case, the way that they organize it is more around the line of private education outside of government. That's down 10%. That's going to be a fair amount of that, sort of the higher ed sector. And then education and healthcare services. I believe we also have some social services in there as well, childcare and the like, also disproportionately hit. So that's that concentration, and that especially in the leisure and hospitality sector, you do have a certain profile by race and by gender and by educational attainment types of individuals, and we'll see that work through, who are disproportionately hurt by the economic fallout of the virus. Next slide. Here we were able to get QCEW data, detailed data from the state that allow us to sort of unpack job changes within Washington County. And so you can see the biggest declines there in Beaverton and Tigard, both as of December, down 9 to 7%. Those rebounds, as you can see, sort of coming out of April into the summer, and then setting there in that range, and that's going to be driven by the concentration of restaurants, hotels, and like in those sort of city centers. Next slide. And geographically, similar piece here, where we're looking both at the darker shades of pink, I guess is what you would call those, and then the sort of the size of the bubble is the amount of employment that you're looking at. So just visually there, you can sort of see lots of employment, both in numbers and losses, in those urbanized areas between Hillsborough and down through Tualatin. Next slide. The county's manufacturers less affected than, and here we've thrown in Portland, city of Portland as a comparison. So your manufacturers have seen no more than a 5% employment decline in the various cities there. By contrast, you see a pretty sizable decline there in Portland, still down 15% relative to its February levels. That's going to be driven by Precision Cast Parts and by Gunderson and others. In the case of Precision Cast Parts, they're tied into the Boeing supply chain, and anybody, again, sort of these stories are all very consistent. Anybody that was tied in directly or indirectly into the travel or tourism sector or leisure and hospitality really got hit hard. And that's what you're seeing in the Portland numbers. Next slide. And then in terms of where the losses are in terms of firm size, so we have all these different cities here, and we're looking at firm sizes of under 10, and then 10 to 25 employees, 25 to 50, et cetera, up to 100 plus. You can see uniformly there, the bigger companies suffered fewer losses, those 100 plus, in just about every one of these cities. And that you get these sort of concentrations of the longest bars there in the uniformly in sort of the 10 to 50 range. And I think you're again sort of probably picking up the restaurants and the hotels and the entertainment venues in that space, the sort of the 10 to 50 employee space. So I think, again, these data are just constantly telling the same stories we look across. And we'll go one more. And now turn to housing market trends. So something of interest because it is tied into finances of both entities, Washington County and Clean Water Services. So we always want to be paying attention to what's going on in the housing market. We'll start a tour here on the next slide. This one is an interesting one that was done by the real estate brokerage CBRE. An analysis of sort of the wins and losses in terms of population moves inside of the Portland metropolitan area. If I sort of step back, the slide that I'm not showing you, a little bit of data that I'm not showing you, is that the Portland metropolitan area as a whole was relatively stable with respect to population, according to this analysis. They had lost a tiny bit of population in 2019. It appears, again, they probably lost a little bit of population in 2020. That was already sort of starting to happen as the recovery was slowing down. But there was a lot of movement inside the metropolitan area. And these are estimated impacts of COVID moving around. And these are per 1,000. So, something that says -8 is 0.8%, not 8%. So moves, but not cataclysmic moves. But basically what you're seeing here is that in no small part because of remote work and people's ability and probably wanting to get out and be in a little bit less of a dense area. You've got losses in the principal urban center, so inner sort of city of Portland. Little bit of losses in other metro cities inside of the Portland metropolitan area, and then sort of a smattering of gains in the urban periphery, the suburban periphery, the semi-urban, and then the rural, and then the rural areas. This is consistent with the story in other parts of the country where you've got, some movement out of the core of metropolitan areas and into, into the outer rings of the metropolitan area. Less the case that you had massive exoduses, with the exception of some of your highest priced cities. So New York City, San Francisco, and even Seattle to some extent saw some true exodus from their metropolitan areas. But for the most part, Others were living in the trends that you're sort of seeing here inside of the Portland area. Go to the next slide, which is going to sort of tell the story in a different way, which is what has happened to Portland metropolitan 1-bedroom apartment rents. And this story is consistent with what you just saw. The rents have been relatively stable if you're sort of looking at them from a metro-wide average. No huge drop-off there. They rose a little bit in last summer, and then they've come back down, et cetera. But you can sort of see the trade-off, that the rents have declined, down 4.5% in the city of Portland as of January, while they rose a couple percent in the rest of the region. So again, just that's all supply and demand working in the way that previous chart would have suggested it was going to, people moving out of the center city or just not moving in as fast as they were in the past. Next slide. We have, we've been ringing this bell on housing supply at ECHO for quite some time, and we'll continue to ring it. Something we think you as elected leaders should be paying attention to is always keeping an eye on housing supply and unit construction relative to net household formation, be that people moving in from outside more than they're moving out, or births outnumbering or households being created, as kids are moving out of people's basements and things of that nature. That drop off there that you can see both in single and multifamily permitting at the sort of end of 2020 is troubling. I guess that's coming into 2021 as well. It's the same kind of depression that you saw if you sort of go back to the Great Recession, circa 2009, 10, 11, 12, et cetera, where our population and our households were continuing to grow in number, but our housing wasn't keeping up with it. And we would argue that was one of the drivers of the higher housing prices and rents that we experienced over the course of the last decade, and that we still haven't seen relief from since. So getting that housing supply moving is a public policy imperative if we want to keep prices affordable and if we want to address our homelessness challenges. Next slide. And here we are, multifamily units under construction in Washington County. There you can see sort of the ebbs and flows, a big drop off in 2019. I think there was a major project in Beaverton that was sort of completed right around that time. So you had this big drop off. But again, you can see as we're coming into 2021 on the multifamily side, starting to slow down some. So again, if there were a handful of indicators that I'd be paying attention to, as a public official, keeping a close eye on permit construction pace is important. Next slide. And this won't help that. This is a region-wide perception of the Portland metropolitan area as and its relative attractiveness from the perspective of real estate investors and bankers and the like. This is a survey conducted over time by the Urban Land Institute for their emerging trends in real estate. And they're basically tracking 80 metropolitan areas, and they're asking the survey takers to rank those 80 metropolitan areas in terms of their relative attractiveness of real estate investment. And you can see in 2017, the Portland metro area, I think it ranked third. And so it's close to the top there, 100% attractive. And then fell to something like 65th in the 2021 survey. So again, if you're thinking about institutional investors and developers and others that might be coming into the region to invest right now, the region has a headwind and a perception challenge that they're going to have to overcome. So next slide. Now I'm going to sort of focus on a few factors outside of housing that the region and the county should be paying attention as rebuilding begins. So let's step into those. This is just a blast from the past. This is the slide that I would have shown last May, or I probably did show it, but I didn't show this exact slide, but I went back and found one. This was the state's forecast of the job recovery from their perspective in June of 2020. So that forecast would have come out in May. And at that time, you can see these comparisons with last recessions and that long, slow recovery in 2017 that took us 7 years basically to get back to 2007 employment levels. The state was forecasting a relatively long recovery here. You can see last June, they were thinking it was going to take 4 years for us to get back to the February of 2020 employment levels. Now, if I come forward and I pull in this next slide, their most recent forecast, look at that, just a much more compressed time frame. They're now anticipating that we'd be back to pre-COVID employment levels in early 2023. So we've knocked an entire year off of the recovery by their measure. And that is in no small part because I think they have seen, first of all, sort of the rebound was faster. I think they've seen the ability of many industries to operate remotely. So that was probably a surprise to them relative to a year ago. But then I don't think many were anticipating how quickly the vaccine was going to be developed and be deployed to say that we'd be as far along as we are in actual vaccinations by this point in the calendar, other than the folks at Pfizer and Moderna who had apparently already developed the vaccine in February of last year. Next slide. So as some nice data here to sort of pay attention to the pulse of households. This is literally called the Census Bureau Household Pulse Survey, and we've looked at this in the past in these reports. This is done at the state level because sample size is just too small to get below the state level here, but you can see relatively stable. Between a quarter and a third of households in Oregon have been reporting over these various surveys that they have somewhat or a very hard time paying for the usual household expenses during the pandemic. So despite $6 trillion of federal aid that has pushed into the community, still having some challenges meeting their usual household expenses. Next slide. This is a related question from the Household Pulse Survey, and this is saying, are you currently caught up on your rent payments? And here you can see the disproportionate impact here on BIPOC households, with almost 1 in 5 saying in Oregon they weren't caught up, 6 percentage points higher than the share of white households answering that question. Good news here, if I believe it, it does appear that Oregonians have been consistently answering this question a little bit more favorably or less severe than the U.S. as a whole. Don't know exactly how that is because we've had sort of a middling impact of the economic consequences of the recession. So I would expect it to be a little more similar, but if we ever unpack the answer to that, we'll let you know. But the bottom line here is, you've got no trivial number of households out there, and I'm sure there are many in Washington County as well that are carrying arrears now. And so as this comes to an end, making sure that we have eviction protections and also getting those rent subsidies and the federal relief in the hands of the people who need it the most is going to be critical. Next slide. In terms of where the economy is headed, you've got an awful lot of excess savings piled up in checking accounts. So if you look at sort of the middle to middle upper and upper class households who may have not been affected by COVID, they didn't lose a job, et cetera, and they've been moving along with sort of their regular income, but haven't had the ability to spend in restaurants or go on trips, et cetera. We've got sort of a month to a month and a half of income stored up in checking accounts that I would imagine when we blow the whistle and the coast is clear, folks are going to be getting out and traveling as soon as next month, and we should see sort of a strong boost. Almost, I don't know of an economic forecaster who's projecting anything other than a pretty big sharp rebound here. That's already underway, but it's just going to accelerate in the second half of 2021 and into 2022, in part fueled by these excess, yes, keep your fingers crossed, fueled by these excess savings. We'll go to the next slide. And of course, then we've got this American Rescue Plan. And this just gives you sort of the high level view at the federal level. This was $1.9 trillion. And up in the upper left-hand corner, those $1,400 stimulus checks. Just moving across in healthcare, you've got all the sort of virus fighting money. But then you also have a temporary expansion of Affordable Care Act subsidies. In the tax policy section, you've got a temporary expansion of the child tax credit, which many are estimating would cut child poverty in half if you maintained it, and made it permanent. Also has expansions to the earned income tax credit. If we go down into the bottom right-hand corner, you've got some direct payments to Head Start centers. You've got subsidies to higher education institutions. You've got some money in that purple section that are rent relief and attempts to sort of mitigate those arrears. And you have some very specific money related to address homelessness, $5 billion in that corner. Loans and credits, you have an extension of the Paycheck Protection Program. You've got some emergency low interest loan programs through the Small Business Administration. Going into the goldenrod color there, you've got direct payments from the federal government into K-12, $1.1 billion to K-12 districts in the state of Oregon. Then you've got that expansion or extension of unemployment benefits at $300 a week through September 8th, I believe. And then back here to the, I'm sure you're well familiar with, the direct aid to state and local governments that is flexible. The reason I sort of stepped through all of this is that as you are sitting down thinking about your flexible dollars in Washington County, strikes me as sort of an unprecedented coordination and allocation decision to make, especially given there is so much other aid being extended in so many other places, sometimes to individuals, sometimes to agencies, sometimes to businesses, et cetera. Somehow you sort of have to keep your fingers on the pulse of all of that. And there's also a time dimension too, because you've got until the end of 2024 to spend it all. So we'll keep going on this deck. In my mind, if I were in your position, I would sort of think of the money in three broad categories. There's sort of the fast and responsive money that, first of all, your CFOs need to sit down and sort of give you clear, agreed upon shortfalls in your current services, and that was sort of the original purpose for that category. And then I think also in this space, just sort of saying who's missed, who somehow this federal money has come out, and are there populations or businesses, et cetera, that have just been systematically missed by this that we have to be paying attention to. Then I would say there's a sort of a second category of maybe just a handful of investments that may be in the tens of millions of dollars as opposed to the ones of billions of dollars, where you may want to make a sizable one-time investment because again, these monies don't go on forever, so they have this one-time feature to them. But what might you want to put in those categories of something more concentrated that's going to take a service or some kind of problem to a different, better level? And then the third, I think, is just contingency and knowing that you don't know everything. For example, right now, if I even just think about, did the federal government put enough money in the restaurant program? Well, I don't know. I mean, the governor just closed the restaurants again for indoor dining. We don't know how long that's going to last, et cetera. So some of these things, only time are going to help us tell what was missed, and for example, whether or not the rent eviction money is enough. So I think I'm getting into some of the material on the next slide. Here are some things to pay attention to. Non-tax filers and the unhoused face barriers to individual aid. So, despite all the outreach and despite the fact this has been going on, this federal assistance has been going on for more than a year, I think we're still hearing from community organizations that there may be some individuals out there who have not overcome those bureaucratic barriers to get the aid to them. So always paying attention to that. Undocumented residents are ineligible for direct assistance through the ARP. There was a state program that was set up after the CARES funding to address that, and that is something we'll want to pay attention to going forward as well. The Oregon Food Bank tells me that the electronic benefit transfer money and the SNAP or the food stamp features have been slow and uneven. That's going to be extended in that other spending category, but paying attention to the implementation of those electronic benefit transfer programs and how long those last and when they come off. Access to business loans and grants is contingent on networks and relationships. If there was anything that we learned out of the Paycheck Protection Program, that big SBA program, it was an awful lot of money. But in that first instance, the ones who got it the fastest and most furiously were those businesses that had long established relationships, especially with community banks. It wasn't even the big banks, the US banks, the Wells Fargos, et cetera. It was these, and you saw a lot of it in the Midwest and the plains of the United States, where there were sort of networks of farming communities, et cetera, that had access to banks, et cetera, much faster and higher receipt rates when there were those sort of tighter relationships. So now sort of coming back and thinking, has everybody got some aid? Are there any other businesses out there who haven't attempted this, and can we get them over that hurdle? And then, as I said, only time will tell whether the restaurant relief, which was advocated most strongly by Congressman Blumenauer, is sufficient. So let's see here. If we advance, I think that brings me to the end, and I'll open up for any questions that you have.
Commissioners, any questions for Mr. Tapania? No, I'm not seeing any. Oh, there you go, Commissioner Rogers.
John, thank you. Once again, it's always useful information. Quite a blend of local, and you brought a lot of, the reserve, a lot of national stuff in. So I have some very specific questions. I don't want to take up too much time.
Give you a shout if things go early.
Mark, you're not muted.
Oh, okay.
That wasn't my question, but okay, Mark, thank you. John, what's the takeaway for local government? Because you're blending a lot of national statistics and saying, well, these kinds of things are happening, but I have some very specific questions of you that I'd like you to answer. So overall, can you give a summary of local, just a brief summary? What should we look at as local government?
Yeah, I think at local government, you are sitting with a really unprecedented opportunity right now with these American Rescue Plan resources. It's unlike any kind of opportunity that I have seen in front of government in my career. It appears to be of a scale that on average meets the need. If I talk to advocates either in DC or locally, I don't think I've had anybody tell me they didn't make a big enough package. But the detail is getting that package to the people who need it. So it's a two-part issue. I think there's a tremendous amount of implementation either by the county, local governments directly, or vis-a-vis their community partners to make sure that that money is wired to the best of its ability to the people who need it in your community. That's job one. And then job two, I think, is to step back and say, and we have this flexible resource that is in the county's name itself. Let's look around 360 degrees in every direction here, because not only do you have money, but Beaverton has money, and Tigard has money, and Tualatin has money, and Hillsborough has money, the state has money, et cetera. So how do you go about, you've got sort of two years to get this done. How do you get to a point where, boy, in 2027, you look back and say, we really did that well. And because we did that well, we have these three things that we always thought were going to be a challenge to get to.
But if we could build off of the question Commissioner Rogers is asking, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at our Coronavirus Relief Fund report and how we took those $104 million and put those into action within less than a year.
Yeah.
And now there's 116 million, if I got the figure right, that needs to extend out through the end of 2024. So would your answer be any different about how to use the ARP funds given how we leverage the CRF funds?
Right. Well, I think you're in a different point in time with a different kind of challenge. The CARES money was more specifically targeted to fighting the virus. And these ARP monies, I would say, are ultimately fungible and flexible, much more fungible and flexible. And you have these monies in a period where, by some economists' estimates, the economy will be running above the projection of where CBO thought the US economy was going to be before the pandemic. So not only did the economy not fall as much as some economists expected, but the federal intervention is taking us above the pre-pandemic trend line. So the context is just different. You're going to have money during a period when, hopefully, and keep knocking on wood, hopefully, unemployment rates are low, restaurants are full, and we're in good economic times. You're not going to be spending it on, utility as much, on utility relief or PPE or contact tracing and other virus-related investments.
Commissioner Rogers?
Yeah, well, thank you, John. I'm doing a little bit of research at the same time you're talking here, just for my own curiosity. But would really like it someday, and this is just for you to put in the back of your mind, little kernels, if we could ever tease out what some of our local incentives, as we call them, or directives, which is other people would call them, or have an impact on the local economy. For instance, and I don't want to get too deep in here, but you got a federal taxing policy right now. They're talking about doing a doubling of the capital gains tax. You're talking about one of the techniques that people with real estate property used to do and still do is, 1031 exchange, where you just exchange into another property. If you limit it to 500,000 as being proposed, you just anyone who's in the real estate market in Portland is crazy. I mean, you got to go to another state because it's you got a 10% on the state side, and if you're going to have 40% on the federal side, you got 50% tax. So those are more global implications that impact. If we in the metropolitan area raise our taxes too much, what happens is we get this flight out to the suburbs, and then they in turn move out with new technologies that are available. You could live in Seaside, Oregon, and certainly not pay some metro taxes and still conduct business all over the world, as I think we all find out. So it'd be curious if anybody could ever tease out what's the hydraulics in all of this so that we balance it. And I know that's a big charge.
Yep.
Sometimes in government, we kind of in a vacuum, we don't realize that was the top 10% or 15% of people in the United States pay 70% of the taxes. And so when people start talking about, let's tax them more, they said, I'm already paying 70%. How much more do I want to pay? And so we've got some big industrial companies, and there's no secret, I think, why I haven't had any inside information, but why Intel is investing 20 billion down in Arizona. Maybe I know what the tax rates are down there. They're half of what Oregon is. So they're looking and saying, what am I doing? And maybe Pam or somebody who deals with Washington because of tax rates. And so I want to make certain that we're very robust. We have a great economy, great place to live. And I don't know what implications we have because everything's always at a high level in these. It's kind of like, this is what's happening, not what, I don't have a dial meter. If I say, well, if I do this, I'm apt to see this fall. If I do this, I'm apt, does that make sense what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we do happen to sit in a region with the biggest difference in method of taxation anywhere in the United States, and it happens to cut right through it on the Columbia River. I mean, there is no other place in the United States where on one side you've got a 10% income tax, the other side you've got zero. Now you've got a capital gains tax that they just passed, and then on the other side you've got the sales tax, and here you don't. And so it is at both once an unusual juxtaposition of taxing policy and sort of a playground for economists who would love to be able to opine about whether or not taxes make a difference. And they do. And we can see, for example, that if you go over to Southwest Washington, in a place, Clark County, that you would not necessarily expect to have such high sort of capital gains income per capita, they're in the top decile nationally. And that is, in no small part, if somebody's sort of coming to retirement age, et cetera, has a business or an asset to sell, they can move over to the other side of the border and do that. And so you see some of those differences. I would characterize taxation as an important second tier. It's a second tier consideration. Businesses are generally looking for good labor. They may need access to transportation networks or raw materials, et cetera. That's going to be their primary focus because all those things are bigger in terms of expenses than the tax, but they do pay attention to tax. And where they tend to pay attention to it more is within a metropolitan context, because they've chosen a metro area and for a variety of reasons. But once they've chosen the metro area, a lot of the other things are the same. I've got similar access to transportation networks. I've got access to a labor pool. I've got access to natural amenities. I can get to Multnomah Falls from Clark County. I can get to the Pacific Ocean from Clark County. So now I'm going to try to optimize, once I've chosen this region, start to optimize on taxes. And so that's where you see some of this come into play. And it does make a difference in this region. And so we always do have to be paying attention to relative competitiveness, both on the tax side, but also on the service side. I mean, if we're taxing people and they're getting services that they value, that's important also.
So did you get to learn all you were hoping to learn, Commissioner Rogers?
No, I'd like a dial-o-meter so I could sit there and say, well, if I do this, what happens? If I do that, what happens? If you could do that, John, I think we'd all be appreciative, have understanding of what we can, how much can we turn the dial and not have an impact?
Yeah, well, there's always an impact. You move the dial and everything shifts a little bit. It may not shift in real time, but it does shift. So there is no magic. There's no magic threshold where all of a sudden I went this far and that triggers something. And it does happen in sort of mysterious ways. It may not, for example, if conditions on the ground are not to the liking of a company, it may not be so much they just get frustrated and shut the whole operation down. But the next time they are expanding, they expand someplace else and not in Washington County. And that just happens on some decision on a anonymous Wednesday in the middle of the year, and it doesn't come with any kind of announcement. It's just you're not seeing your local employment growing. It's growing someplace else. So
I think we're going to need to move on to questions from Commissioner Willie as well as Commissioner Fye.
Well, yeah, I think, John, first of all, thank you for training Matt the way you did, and we stole him away from you, and we're proud of it. I just want to let you know that he's doing a great job. So thanks for the training.
Yeah, we're happy to contribute to the region's growth.
All right. But I think my question probably is more because Commissioner Teresa and I were actively engaged with the CARES money getting out into the businesses. And we did that primarily through grants and working with the cities and all those kinds of things. It seems like this money needs to be maybe distributed a little bit differently. But then we look at your statistics that says the food and beverage industry is still really, really struggling. And so I don't know we can step in and really backfill or provide funding for them sufficient enough to save some of that industry. It's pretty significant. So how would you see, I guess, how would you communicate to us maybe a different perspective on how best we can help businesses other than $3,000 or $5,000 grants going to probably at best 20% of the industry?
Right. Yeah. So I would say, trying to help those businesses get every last dollar that they are, legally and morally eligible for out of the federal coffers. And we've done an analysis inside of the city of Portland of coverage of PPP relative to the number of businesses, and you can see sort of geographic differences. A lot of concentration sort of closer to downtown, and then it sort of falls off a little bit as you get into East Portland. Right? And that, I'm guessing, almost has to do with the fact that you just have less networking out there. You probably have some business owners who may speak a language other than English as their first language, who could be struggling with applications, or everybody struggles with SBA application, et cetera. So just absolutely making sure that that Washington County businesses are getting every bit of assistance out of the federal government they're eligible for, I think would be job one. And then I would say probably take some of that resource out of the ARP and push it further into time. So you could sort of sit back and say, boy, here we are in, middle of 2022, and it looks like there's still a number of businesses here that are just teetering. What might we be able to do to save them if there is an additional resource out there for them?
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Nafisa.
Oh, thank you, Jerry. John, nice to meet you. I'm the newest member. I think this is our first time meeting. Thank you for a great presentation. I wanted to just directly ask, I guess I have two questions. So first one is, what is your recommendation for an equitable recovery for Washington County to us as a board of directors? And then the other, I think it's in the future, analysis or updates that you do. I wonder if we can look into, the financial impacts of suicide from COVID. That was something that when I was doing contact tracing, that was really prevalent in real life. And then the other ones are sort of comments about the presentation, which was around, when there's always a data, high-level data is presented, especially, devastating data, as we saw because of COVID. I wonder if there's a way to elevate the stories or the experiences of the people, sort of pulling that, disaggregating that narrative. And then where does childcare fit in all this? I know it came out as a question, but that was just sort of a comment.
Right. Yeah, well, thank you for that, all of that. Yes, starting at the beginning with respect to an equitable recovery, one place that I would look is, we, as quickly as this recovery seems to be unfolding, we have an awful lot of people who are going to be out of work or still outside of the labor force throughout this year and throughout next year. I mean, if that's what that is, fast as that line's coming back, it's still not coming back until the first quarter of 2023. And thankfully, we sort of have a federal posture, both in the administration, but also in the Fed itself with Chairman Powell, who saw the pain of the last recovery and how long that took, how inequitable it was because it took a long time. And it was BIPOC households were the ones that had the slowest recovery and only really started to see some gains at the end of the last economic recovery. So sort of put that together, one piece that I've been thinking about in terms of equitable recovery is, what if there was, and this isn't necessarily in the county's wheelhouse, but it would be either in the states, probably in the state's wheelhouse, would be sort of a deep investment in workforce over the course of the next year and a half for those who've been dislocated and lost jobs out of the leisure and hospitality sector. It is disproportionately individuals who either have a high school degree or only a little bit of post-secondary training. And if they're idle and they're struggling to find their way back in the leisure and hospitality sector, that's a big opportunity to take some time and do some investment to train them for jobs in the healthcare sector, in the manufacturing sector, in the information technology sector, et cetera. So taking advantage of that time. I think then I'll hop over to the end of your commentary with respect to childcare. and getting deeper, better funded supports there. I mean, clearly we saw the impact of the loss of school. I mean, K-12 schools sort of serve a child care capacity issue, as does the formal child care networking itself. And how devastating that was to families with kids. And I think, I was listening to some commentary about the slow growing US population that's coming out of the census findings last year. And it's the same story in Oregon. We're slow growing. Fertility rates are down. And it has to do with sort of the costs and complications of raising a child. And I think childcare is increasingly becoming sort of an economic development and an economic equity imperative if we want to grow equitably, or frankly, if we want to grow much at all, we're going to have to invest more in our child care capabilities. And then with respect to your points on suicide, that I think all kinds of different accountings of what has taken place in the last year are absolutely critical. I mean, I am comforted by the fact that Washington County as a community didn't suffer nearly as many COVID deaths per capita as most other places in the country. And but that is not to say there are all kinds of costs beyond death of the suffering that took place in households that we need to be paying attention to. But at the same time, very pleased that that we came out as well as we did on the public health front.
Anything else, Commissioner Fye? No.
No, thank you, Chair, and thank you, John.
Commissioner Treese?
I just want to say thank you to John. I've seen different parts of this presentation, and he always does a great job of tailoring it to the audience that he's addressing. So I appreciate it, and it really is good background for us as we go into our budget work. Nice to see you, and thank you, John.
So I'll finish up. This time last year, we were all facing a first ever experience, right? First ever global pandemic of a coronavirus here in our lifetimes. And we didn't know what the future would bring. At this point last year, many people who contracted COVID thought it was a death sentence simply because the only people they knew who had contracted COVID had actually died. We're in a very different situation now with the vaccine. I am grateful, as you've noted, that the death rate here in Washington County is less than that of the state. Kudos to our public health team, as well as healthcare workers and hospitals across Washington County, as well as the state, and really to our community for willingness to embrace the public health protocols. But we still don't know what our crystal ball will bring. So I think we did a good job with the coronavirus relief funds and ensuring that we met the deadline for getting them out by the end of the year, until that deadline changed right at the last minute. But that's okay. We put those dollars into action. And now we have the challenge of continuing to support the COVID response that continues. And we probably will have additional variants to pivot around between now and the end of 2024. as well as the public health recovery. We need to get more people vaccinated, and I remain hopeful that the FDA will allow vaccinations of our youth 12 years of age or older, and that will provide additional assurance that the in-classroom experience, full-time in-classroom experience, can happen with the new academic year. It's been way too bumpy of a ride for our working parents, all parents, doesn't matter. As Commissioner Fye noted, we need to get childcare expanded beyond pre-pandemic levels, because we had a full 36 county childcare desert throughout our state. So I know that the 3 lady members of our commission continue to raise childcare needs. I know I worked really hard to find additional CRF dollars to put into expanded childcare support, and we still have a ways to go. So I think to end it all, I'm really grateful for the willingness of our Clean Water Services CEO and our Washington County CAOs for being willing to find a third party to ground us in economic forces, rather than having to rely upon our own staff to continue to get information for us and help us develop a crystal ball to put resources into action, our own resources, let alone these additional resources from the federal government as well as the state. We're not done yet. So thank you for being on the journey with us, and onward ho we go. I certainly hope we'll be able to say that we recovered from this recession a bit sooner than the end of 2023. Fingers crossed.
Thanks for bringing me along on your journey.
You bet. Thanks again.
Okay, take care.
Are there any last messages Diane, you or Mark or Ms. Angie want to make before we leave that topic and move on to our next?
I think we're just very appreciative of some insight that John Tapania is providing to both of our teams and also to the board, especially as we go into the budget. And I'm still contemplating that we're a region in recovery. So thank you, Chair.
You bet. You bet. Okay, well, oh, go ahead, Ms. Angie.
Thank you, Chair. So I just wanted to add, this conversation reiterated grounding on hope that we will be moving into recovery mode, and also the reminder that we're still in response, and we don't know what response will look like in the next month, much less out into 2024. So being flexible and nimble and having a long-term strategic approach is going to really be important to ensure vitality of all Washington County.
Good points. Good points. Who knows what the future will bring? So quick question on the remaining order. We have an executive session as well as our legislation and government relations update. Are we going to continue with the executive session first and then come back to the ledge update?
Yes, as there was a time certain speaker for that item.
Okay, terrific. So at this juncture, we need a motion to move to executive session, which will involve a different Zoom link pursuant to ORS 192.660 sub 2 sub H. What are the wishes of the commission? Is there a motion? Motion from Commissioner Rogers, a second from Commissioner Willie. All those in favor, please vote by saying aye or raise your hand. Thank you, commissioners. Anyone opposed? The motion carries unanimously 5-0. So we'll see you on the other side, as we've been saying, with that Zoom link. Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can't
Yes,
turn my
I
video
can hear
on,
you, Chair.
but I can't turn my video on. I
Me
don't know.
too.
I
I-
can't. There we go.
Now my video will turn on. That was weird.
There was a setting. I think it's a different Zoom than normal. I think you guys were using the CAO, and this is Community Engagement's Zoom account. So I think that's why.
Okay, well, I don't know how a member of the public will have this Zoom link.
Madam Chair, I have added it to the iAgenda list and labeled it for this legislative update for the public.
So earlier today, I tried to find the afternoon link on the iAgenda setup, and I'm not proficient enough yet to find it. So as long as somebody else is on the hook for it and not me, I'll have to go with it.
Yes, absolutely, Madam Chair. Our staff is working for ways to make it more easily for everyone.
I just don't know where to see it. So I'm confused, clearly. But legal's in the room, so they must know. My phone's been going off the hook because there's a little confusion via the governor's office right now. So I don't usually pay attention to my telephone at all during our meetings, but it's been a little wild the last half hour. Sorry. Welcome back to afternoon work session. It's so good to see everyone's faces. Let's see. Oh, we got all the commissioners. Is the recording happening again?
Yes, we are live.
Terrific. Thank you. Could we turn this over to you, Mr. Nagra, to lead us through with the team?
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Chair Harrington, Board of Commissioners. For the record, my name is Jagjit Nagra, Government Relations Manager here at the county. This afternoon, I'm joined by my full team, Aaron and Paige Spence. Today, we're going to be bringing to you, for your consideration and review, 7 ARPA, American Rescue Plan, state legislative district-specific projects. And I'm excited to work through these with you, as is Chair Harrington with that awesome dance. Next slide, please. In terms of our agenda, we have 2 items to work through. One, quickly, I'm going to provide a brief overview of the process with this, or lack thereof. I know many of you commissioners might be feeling that way. We are too. And then second, the bulk of our conversation is going to be working through each of the 7 ARPA district-specific project proposals that government relations worked with our county departments, along with Clean Water Services, to advance for your consideration. So in terms of form factor, we're going to be having there's going to be typically 1 to 2 projects in each slide. As we move through those projects, we'll be seeking your thumbs up or thumbs down. And then at the very end, near the tail end of the conversation, I'll be asking for your board's prioritization. All the projects will be on one slide, so you'll be able to see them and review them. And we'll work through that as we can. So let me kick off the conversation today with an overview of the process here. I'm going to start this conversation off by taking you back to summer of 2020. The state legislature, when they had their CRF dollar allotment, their dispersal from the federal government to the state, primarily used the emergency board, the e-board, to deploy dollars, okay? I'm not taking a position on this, but many people statewide felt as though that process lacked transparency, did not account for public input, and also did not adequately or equitably flow to all 4 corners of our state in an equitable manner. So our state legislature knew that they were going to be getting another big check from the feds, that's ARPA, and so in their infinite wisdom decided to essentially allot $4 million to each Senate district, each senator, and $2 million to each House representative. That is the process that we are working within today. These are the projects we are bringing forward. So this has nothing to do with our direct allocation. nor does this have to do with the larger programmatic bucket of money. I think it was over $2 billion in state reviews. This is a special set aside they're creating. The timeline is really truncated. We learned about this in earnest in the middle of next week. Myself, Aaron, and Paige hustled to organize a Washington County caucus meeting on Friday of last week. We had attendance by both of our co-chairs of Ways and Means, Senator Johnson and Senator Steiner Hayward. It's the first time they've attended a caucus meeting, and they were engaged. What I will say, what came from that meeting was some points of clarity around the fact that we did realize that some of the requests they're receiving aren't even tied to COVID. When you're thinking about ARPA, that was kind of news to me. I just would have suspected that these projects that you would submit would have to be tied to COVID, COVID relief, COVID recovery. Not the case. So, as you'll see with our 7 projects, there's a diversity. Some are connected to COVID very clearly. Some are more diffuse. Some arguably may not be connected in any real meaningful way at all. But what we're doing is we're providing a diverse array of options so that we're hedging and we get it, some of our projects can be considered, but we're not putting all of our eggs in one basket. So in just today, I was on a lobbying Representative McLean with Director Schroeder from our juvenile department, and she actually took the time to thank Washington County for organizing that meeting because it helped get all the legislators on the same page. So now our process is we'll be submitting our request to Senator Steiner Hayward's office in conjunction with Representative Helm's office. They will be organizing the request for the Washington County caucus for us and then doing their own prioritization and sausage making, if you will. So that is where we are at. Inquiring minds might want to know, Jagjit, why is this timeline so short given that ARPA dollars have a 2024 deadline in terms of utilization? I can't answer that question. I've asked it multiple times. I do not know why. My thinking is that legislators want to get these dollars in the door to serve their communities, right? There's an exigency. We know that. John mentioned that earlier today. So I think it's largely that. We don't have guidance as well, right? We're still waiting on that Treasury guidance. And so I just want to alert you to all of that before we move into today's presentation. So with that, I'm going to be turning it over to Paige Spence, who will be talking about our first project. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Jagjit, and good afternoon, board. Sorry, my screen got a little shaky there for a minute. I was trying to make my lighting better. I feel awfully dim today, but we are where we are. Thank you all for taking the time to hear these proposals. And so the first one is going to be rehabilitation for a building that the Washington County Housing Authority already owns. And this is the Colonies building that is in Tiger. It is in Senator Jenny Burdick's district and Representative Daisha Graber's district. And so the need for this could be anywhere from 2 million upwards of 5 million. So the housing authority is flexible on what they could get. Essentially, this is an apartment complex that is in the county's asset portfolio where they rent to the community at around 60% area median income or below. And the housing authority has a consultant looking at the scope of work that would be needed, but we know that there has not been a major renovation on this project housing building since its construction. So it needs sort of comprehensive renovation maintenance and to make sure that we are providing not just affordable housing, but livable affordable housing to all of our community members. So that is the first project that I'm bringing for you. And then the second project, I'm really excited about being able to talk to you about this one because it's a project that the Housing Alliance, which we're a member of, and I sit at that lobby table, has also been thinking about. So essentially, the Housing Authority has been in touch with various stakeholders regarding options to preserve 2 affordable housing properties that we currently do not own. These are not in the county's portfolio. There's the Wood Spring building in Tiger, and then the one I'm bringing to you, which is in the Belleau, but I have no background in French, so I'm going to say Belleau Woods Complex in the Aloha area of unincorporated Washington County. The affordability period for this building expires at the end of the year, and the owners have indicated that they would prefer to sell the property. They do not continue or plan to continue extending that affordability period. And as housing has been identifying a potential path to preserve both of these projects, the Belleau Woods and the Wood Spring building, They've engaged a consultant to prepare a financial model for the purchase and renovation of both of these properties, and are identifying a gap of about $8 million to $12 million for both of those combined. So the housing unit at Belle Isle Woods supports families who live on limited incomes who are eligible for below market rate housing. So preserving this affordable housing option could be a real win for our community, as well as for Senator Lieber and Representative Campos, whose constituents live in the building. And I think you all are aware by now that Rep. Campos in particular is a real housing champion, and Senator Lieber a real behavioral health champion. So I think that both of those legislators could be excited about the opportunity as well. And that is all I have for you for my overview, but I'm happy to take any questions or turn it over to Aaron.
The only detailed question I have on the Tigard one, the colonies, is in order to do the rehab, will those residents be displaced, or will there are different ways other rehab projects have done it, where they have housing while it's being rehabbed versus, sorry, you got to go find a different place to live and then you can reapply. So has there been any thought on that? It's the only downside I could come up with.
Absolutely, Chair Harrington. Thank you for that question. I will say first off that I don't know the answer. I'm going to ping housing right now, and maybe by the end of this presentation have an answer for you. But I will say that I know that the intent from housing is to preserve the affordability and stable housing for the families that are currently there. So whether someone might have to relocate temporarily, it's my understanding that the plan is to keep these same people housed in this building, but I will try to get that technical answer for you.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that the legislators would have the answer to that question. I can wait for the answer.
Okay, thank you so much for asking.
Other commissioners on these two projects? Commissioner Rogers?
Paige, when I looked at this, my general question was, are they looking at site specific? They want to really identify a project, or could you identify a need and then fill in with a project? For instance, there were other projects that we were looking at. Another one in Tigard, another one over by Washington Square, another one that housing was looking at, and it may or not have penciled without some additional money, which this would have. If these don't work out exactly for the reasons you have to displace people at the colony simply because you're building and going along, or this other one doesn't pencil out, 64 individuals for $8 million isn't a tremendous amount of individuals. I mean, I like units, a lot of units. So is a bucket of money that we could use our cracked staff at housing, like Tommy, and say, gee, if you had 6 or 7 million, do you have another 6 or 7 million? We could do a $12 or $15 million project.
Yeah, that's a great question, Commissioner Willie. I'm sorry, Commissioner Rogers. Thank you for that. Let me say a couple of things. So first, one detail that I did not mention about the Belle Isle Woods complex, specifically the one that would be a building acquisition for us, is it 64 individuals and families. So that's 64 units. And one thing that actually is really special about this project that I meant to say and didn't, so thank you for the prompt, is it's actually 2 and 3 bedroom units. And the 3 bedroom units, particularly according to our housing authority, are quite difficult to find, especially the affordable level, but I think in general in Washington County. And so preserving this affordable family option, I think actually is a really unique opportunity. The second thing I will say is that, and you guys, I got my first COVID shot yesterday. I'm thrilled, but I am feeling a little bit under the weather today. So thank you for bearing with me. The rehabilitation for the colonies is also a good project. But when I had mentioned that there were sort of 2 that we were identifying for acquisition along the Belle Isle Woods line, it was Belle Isle Woods and Woodspring. And Woodspring is in Representative Graber's district. And my understanding, and again, this is not something that the county owns, so it didn't go through us, but the Housing Alliance had submitted that to Representative Graber's office earlier in April. So there's sort of this, like Jajit was saying, we're not quite sure what the rush is, but the legislature, if you will, has a couple different mechanisms in place through which they're trying to move some of the ARPA dollars. And so there was a deadline back on April 2nd for some kind of big projects. This was driven by the legislature, and the legislature was doing it. And I don't think that we were asked to submit anything, but the Housing Alliance did submit the purchase proposal of that Woodspring building through Representative Graber's office. And we don't know the outcome of that yet, whether that project will go or not, but that's the reason for bringing to you Belle Woods and not Wood Spring, even though I had mentioned both. And then the last thing I will say to actually answer your question is that no, there is not just a, we have affordable housing needs. Could you give us some dollars? They do want specific projects. I hope that helps answer your question and provide some context.
If I could ask a question.
Willie, go ahead. Yeah.
So how much money are we talking about? I mean, these are two of the projects. As Jajit said, there's 7 of them. They range from $90,000 to unlimited. What happens if this purchase of this Belle Woods, we get the money and we can't close the deal for some reason or another? Then where does that put us? It seems to me like that one's the most speculative of it. The Colonies one, we know that there's that those repairs need to be done, and so we're going to have to do that, and this would actually cover the cost of it, depending on how much of that. I mean, $2 to $5 million is a pretty big swag. Kind of like to have that defined, but realizing we're in short order, so okay, I get that. But it just seems to me like the Belle Woods is more speculative in what we do with that money.
Commissioner Rilla, you're absolutely right. And, and yes, so I think there's a couple of things I'll say to in response. So one, yes, the Tigard Affordable Housing Rehab, good project. That is, like you said, something we already own. It's in the Housing Authority Strategic Asset Management Plan. That's a pretty, cut and dry, simple project, right? So certainly, and I will say too, that at the end of this presentation, we'll be discussing which ones of the 7 to put forward, if any, and if so, are we prioritizing any of them? So your board can certainly have that conversation, but I do think that there are enough dollars to go around, given that we're looking at roughly 4 million per Senate district and then 2 per House district. So if you think about the number of Washington County legislators who would be putting together proposals, I think that our full kind of figure of all the projects is probably there in terms of the number of legislative districts getting allocations. That said, of course, we do not, would have a full picture of what other organizations or nonprofits or cities or other entities may be putting before the legislature. So it really is up to them to kind of have to prioritize and figure it out. And so what I would say that on the speculative nature of Belle Woods is, should your board elect to put it to the legislature as an option for them to consider, that I would pretty much immediately turn around and have meetings with our program staff and Representative Campos and Senator Lieber to let them know kind of what it would look like. And we know that the seller is wanting to take offers in mid-May. And from that point, it would probably be, I think, 90 to 120 days was my recollection for actually closing the deal. And we, would hope that we might be able to get a letter of support or something like that from the legislators if they're interested in that purchase, to go along with our purchase application. So you're right. We absolutely could get outbid or, not be the ultimate purchaser of the property. So I think my philosophy in putting it forward is kind of it doesn't hurt to try, and we would be very transparent with the legislators and let them know that it's not a done deal. And to your point, I think that sure, Representative Campos or Senator Lieber might decide that they would rather have a really guaranteed win for their districts and not want to put this one forward as their priority. But I figured, it's worth a shot, especially given that Representative Campos is a new legislator and a real housing champion. So I hope that helps. Any other questions or comments? I can only see some of you at a time on my screen, so I think we're covered. But I'm happy to turn it over to Aaron. And again, I'll try to get an answer to the chair's question. Yeah,
you're unmuted. Do you have any questions?
No, I apologize.
Not a problem. But while I've got you, I just need to step out for a bio break. So as vice chair, can you run the meeting for a few minutes? Okay. See you soon.
Okay, thank you everyone for hearing about the 2 affordable housing projects. And with that, I think we can go to the next slide and I will let Aaron speak.
Good afternoon, board. Erin Doyle here to talk through a couple of slides worth of projects. This is where some of the answers that Paige gave you are really important, because this first project on the list is the small business and economic support for $10 million. That's more than 4 or 2 or a combination of 4 and 2s. But the intention is to have this program work countywide. So I think Jajit mentioned that the process that the legislators are going through is still a little fuzzy for everyone, including the legislators. But they've been informed that they're really only allowed to have 4 projects to cover their expenditures that they're allowed to have. So a recommendation that we got out of the county caucus meeting was to make one project a bigger to kind of pool all of a project into one where it matches together. So originally we had thought about doing a small business programmatic request and a childcare programmatic request, but in allowing the Washington County delegation to have the conversation about what they want to fund across the county and each pool some of their resources into it, we opted to put these 2 programs together because they basically are the economic development support in reaction to COVID. And so we will be providing the legislators with information, if this is one that you guys want us to put forward, about how they could break it up if they chose to and what each of the components would cover. But so I'll do that for you now. The Small Business Assistance Program is looking at first step at funding the business recovery centers, or if they undergo a purpose and extent change, that would help pay for that. And it'd be about $2 million for the course of the next 2 years to cover those 4 centers across the county and continue that across the county outreach that they've been doing, and a lot of the work that they've been doing to hit all of those small businesses and making sure that people have the resources, the resilience, the education, the information that they need to continue. I think that's been a pretty common theme in your work sessions today, from this morning's conversation, at the board meeting as well, that this economic support structure that we've started to create here in Washington County is really vital to those businesses, and continuing the success of building on that program. We'd be asking the legislature for 2 out of these $10 million to go towards those programs. The remaining $8 million would be split between 2 childcare assistance programs our Health and Human Services Department has been spearheading, in part as their work during the CRF dollar allocations. They kind of noted that there's 2 pretty significant needs across the county to kind of help bring us out of that childcare desert that you all talked with John Topanga about. The first would be looking at the facilities themselves and figuring out how the facilities can be improved and upgraded to become more accessible and to become larger, so they can serve larger populations within those facilities. That would be a county program in which we go in and do those studies and figure out what they need, and then provide grant dollars to those businesses to pay for those changes, or even look at facilities that can better meet the needs of a growing childcare business. The other piece that HHS has recommended out is to actually bring the childcare providers themselves up in capacity. So there's various levels of number of children you can have in your care based on facility size, but also licensing. And one of the things that HHS has discovered through the process that we've taken a really deep dive into this with our community development partners is noting that the materials and the educational opportunities for a lot of providers aren't there because of language barriers. And we have been working to bring materials into a number of the languages that are spoken throughout Washington County, but don't have materials ready for them. So that program would not just bring the materials up to date, but also extend the opportunity to extend training to those folks so that they can either increase their licensure or increase the size of their business through networks of support that are done in culturally competent manners, and also address folks where they are in the language that they're speaking with other providers that do the same work, in addition to the county assistance that we can provide. So in combination, this ask of the legislators would be put to them to say, we have $10 million of request here that will cover 2 years of programming to do these 3 things We think all of them are important to the economic stability and a long-term economic recovery of Washington County coming out of COVID. And we want to see investment in it. And we'll work with you to make sure that however the monies get pooled, they get spent in a manner that is consistent with their intention as well as ours, which fits into those three basic buckets. And basically we'd be asking the delegation to each give a little so that we can extend across the county. I will say that this one has got a big price tag, but I do think really meets both a COVID need and a recovery need that we've identified, and builds off of programs that the county has been really trying to make sure it's consistent, not just after CRF funds were there, but through continuing work. The other thing that we will note for the legislators, and I would note for you, is that this is not intended to build a program that we will be coming back to the state legislature to pay for in the long term. So after we spend our dollars that we get from the state, we would either have to we would be looking for other means to fund those programs if they are going to continue under the county's auspices, or else we would find a way to make them self-sufficient. So that is the $10 million small business and economic support bucket, really focused on those two things. And I'm going to stop there and see if there are any questions on that, because it is a lot.
The chair is back. Chair, did you want to ask for any questions? You're on mute.
So I've been back through most of it. So Commissioner Treese, do you have any questions?
Yes, I have a question.
And then Commissioner Willie.
Erin, would you, on the childcare piece, is in the last go round, we focused on individual providers. And so here, or part of the focus was on individual providers. Here, when it says HHS department has focused on build the capacity of facilities and providers available, is it a mix of individual providers as well as the larger type facilities?
Yeah, so this is HHS as it's a continuation of work that comes out of that individual provider program. Instead of just doing a straight grant to keep folks open, this is about looking at the physical plant, but also making sure that the folks who are in charge of these smaller childcare businesses are able to grow their businesses as appropriate. So it's about capacity building, both at a physical infrastructure level, but also as a network of providers. So it's keeping them in business, but extending their businesses if they're prepared to do that. We're not making anyone expand, obviously.
Got it. Thank you.
Commissioner Willie?
Yeah, so who's going to manage this money? You know, we had to set up our little ECDev team for the CARES money.
You didn't do the child care one. Pam and I were on that.
I was saying the question is a blanket question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Who's going to do this?
So I've started to have the conversations between for all of these programs with the folks who were there or have replaced the folks that were there. So with the small business dollars, we'd be looking probably to Matt Craigie, the new economic development manager for the county, to kind of take over the reins as we look at this, how we do provide the supports and capacity building for the small businesses. And then for the child care programs, would be again turning to HHS, who would work in partnership with their the CBOs that they've been working with. So the funds would be managed and the programs would have oversight through the county, and different departments would take on the different portions that are appropriate to their work. But then we would continue to work with the partnerships and the community organizations to make sure it's not like we would be starting internal programs, but we'd be working through the programs that we've already started to establish those relationships with. But the programs themselves would have management structures set internally. And so we would figure out how we can balance all of that with the funding. Does that answer your question, Commissioner?
So
go ahead, Chair, sorry.
I have a couple questions. So I think on this one that legislators would have somewhat of a difficult time with the packaging of this. We've been more privy to the locational value of these. So I really think that, and also knowing various legislators and their bents, I think splitting these up into may be easier. For example, there were the 4 BRCs, and this continues their great work and legacy. Beaverton, Hillsborough, the Adelante one with Forest Grove Plus, and then the one in South County, and I can't remember how that one, pardon me?
Tualatin.
Tualatin, great. So I think the weight of the location of the BRCs may be somewhat troublesome. So my thinking on this one is back pocket. I bet you the response is going to be, well, why don't you folks use the ARP dollars for this one? So I just think this one, well, I can certainly relate to it. I think the legislative approach is going to be a little difficult.
Sorry, there was some breakup on my end. I'm sorry I interrupted. We have had some conversations with legislators who have reached out on these. And so I think offering it as a package, but telling them, they have flexibility in how to approach it. I think some members of the legislature are interested in looking at how they can invest in these types of programs, others less so, but this is putting it on with one big bucket. So we can say, just identify one project if you wanted to do both small business and childcare. But if you as a delegation would rather split them, how you want to split them, we'll work with you to make sure that the language is right and we get the money where it needs to go. Okay. And that also, yeah, and we've also talked with the delegation, and the delegation has to work out for itself how to give credit to each regional, like if four members put their funds into one thing, how they credit each other and how we talk about it on a county-wide scale. I think those things
So you're taking that largest expanse of possibilities. I'm with you, Erin.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I think we have to take a look at how we manage the two aspects of that program and don't lump it all into just one work group.
I would leave that to Tanya and all of the various managers to actually figure out how to do it the best way for the county. If there's no questions about that, I
don't see any others. So yep.
Okay. I want to circle to something that's not on the slide, but is an answer to a question that you asked Chair Harrington this morning during the leadership conversation, I believe it was, or might have been during the board meeting. At this point, I don't know. It was a long day.
Doesn't matter.
So about if the county is to go into extreme risk and we are to being required to shut down, our businesses are being required to shut down. You mentioned that there's that $20 million that the governor talked about in her press conference and in her press release. After that, I reached out to the governor's office to figure out where that was coming from and what information we would have. And the information I got from Leah is still changing, in part because, why not? In part because we are not actually in extreme risk yet. So this is still an if statement for us. But their plan for that $20 million currently for those counties that are currently in extreme risk is to give that money directly to the counties under an extension of the contracts that they signed with us under the CRF program, because these are going to be CRF dollars. They are not ARPA dollars. They are tapping back into their CRF bucket and will backfill back into it somehow. So they would be extending the contracts that they signed with us in November to do that emergency when they basically shut down everything around Thanksgiving before the holidays. So we know that may come if we're still trying to figure out, since we are not in extreme risk, but we are teetering on that announcement from the governor's office. We are anticipating at any moment now of whether or not we will go into extreme risk. So I've asked the question of Leah, how will it be expanded to include us in that, and how will you be informing us that information and the contract extension?
I think part of what we were looking at was Commissioner Willie and I were concerned about this promise of funding, which is taking time, and the businesses have expenses now. So we're not interested in those dollars not being available until July. We want to see those dollars being available ASAP. So no more promises of dollars to help with restaurants. You know, in Multnomah County and Clackamas County, they've already been in extreme risk and those bills are past due. So that's really the message we were trying to push. Get these dollars available ASAP.
Yeah, so I think Leah's Horner in the governor's office is working on that. And I have also touched base with Tanya and Matt to talk through all of this as I've gotten the information, and keeping them updated as well. So we will stay on top of it as best we can and fill you all in. But it does sound like we will be in that lucky position of not having gone into extreme risk in the first round, but if it does get extended to us, that the dollars are there and ready to be pushed out to us quickly, which helps our businesses here in Washington County. It's not a great answer, but it's the answers that we have right now. So,
but I don't mind pushing the message of, Governor, no more promising, get the dollars available and get them out to those counties in extreme risk now.
Noted.
Good work in trying to find us answers.
We're doing our best. So back to the ARPA conversation. The other smaller project here on the slide is $90,000, which doesn't seem like a big amount when we were talking like 10 million, 5 million, $90,000, really question mark here. So basically what's happened in the SDIF, which I should have remembered to look up what that acronym stands for, but I have forgotten to do so. That is money that is provided in grants to local governments and transit providers to extend transit service. And when we all put in our grant applications to allocate across the region those SDIF dollars, we were told we had to come up with a 10% match. After all of the applications were in for these grants, ODOT came back and said, we like all of them, so we're going to overspend and increase your match to 20%, which they said you can use this other bucket of funding that's usually reserved for a specific type of transit program, and just transition that, and we'll allow you to use it to meet your match. Unfortunately, in Washington County, we are not the direct recipient of those dollars. We use Ride Connect for those to run those programs, and they are the direct recipient of those dollars. So we don't have those dollars to shift into cover this additional 10% of local costs. $90,000 represents the portion in Tualatin of Washington County services, and also Clackamas County in 205. So we'd be looking to legislators who sit in that area. We didn't get ahead of you on this conversation, but Representative Prusak and I have had a conversation, and that she's willing to look at it and balance it against everything else. So I just wanted to let you know that $90,000 just basically allows us to provide these services without having to do some really weird bookkeeping math, which no auditor would like us to do. So that is the Tualatin Shuttle project. And if you ask me more specifics about accounting, I will plead, I'll get back to you. So if any questions on that, Commissioner Rogers, you look.
No, Aaron, just a comment. When I was on that HB 2017 committee, we discussed this very project at some length. And I know I got lobbied by the Chamber of Commerce in Tualatin, as well as the mayor there, Frank Bubiak. And I know that in talking with Clackamas County, at least their representatives there, they really like the project, because that 205 is way underserved. So to me, this one might be an interesting one, even for small numbers, because you're going to hit a lot of districts. I mean, you're going to hit a couple, if not 3 Senate districts, and a couple of at least, or 3 maybe House districts. And so it's certainly not COVID related, but I don't think the project probably will go without without the match. That's what you're saying. So
Yeah,
it might be a good filler.
Yes, it's a good filler, and I think it meets a need, and I can always make a COVID connection in that transit is massively underfunded because of COVID, and therefore we need to do more to invest in it so that it can be strong and stable revenue replacement. See, I'm good at this.
There you go. Thanks.
The other thing related to economic development that's not on this slide, but I wanted to make you all aware of, is that we have been talking with and sharing thought processes with Work Systems Inc., and they have put in their own request for a large pool of funds to do workforce development projects related to COVID retraining. We will be supportive of that as it fits within the county goals, but we had Work Systems Inc. provide that request directly because they would be the direct recipients, so it just made more sense. So with that, I'll go to the next slide and not be faster, but try to be faster. So this is a couple of projects that Mark Jockers put forward. There was a third project that he also has been working on, and we're now working with some other partner organizations on the Fano Creek trail improvements. That project hits a number of different jurisdictions, so we're trying to figure out who's the right person to put it on the list, because it also crosses a couple of representative districts, Senate districts. And so the partners in it have been Tualatin Hills Park and Recreation, Clean Water Services, the county, and the city of Tigard. And it has, I had to write all this down. So we're looking at a road crossing, improvements some to the master plan and boardwalk elements, and the underpass trail. And why Clean Water Services is involved is because there's also flooding issues that have to be mitigated. And all these projects kind of work together to create one whole project of about $1.7 million. And right now we're working to see if City of Tigard or Tualatin Hills Park and Rec can put that forward, and if and have them be the lead asker, but with the support of Clean Water Services in the county, who've already put in the work. This has gone through public plan, the public process that it needs to. Is a very important project for safety, trail access, and mitigating those flooding issues. So provided you're give me the thumbs up on this, we'll be working with those partners to continue moving that forward to the list with whoever is the lead. What is on this list are two things that do have a very tight COVID tie. And I would remind you, not that you need reminding as Clean Water Services Board, but special districts received no explicit allocation of funds through the ARPA process, and instead are now going to have to look to the state and to us to provide their revenue replacement if possible, and to cover other projects that are related to COVID work. So Clean Water Services did some thinking and looked at two things that meet on their priorities and some very important work that they've been doing. So $200,000 for the ongoing wastewater testing project that has been undertaken in partnership with OHA and OHSU and Oregon State University. While there is some federal funding here, this would just enhance our capacity to continue this work out further, which is really helpful for public health and tracking variants through neighborhoods. The other item on this slide is really Clean Water Services' primary priority related to COVID and COVID relief is the ratepayer assistance, and basically a revenue replacement for those that can no longer afford to pay their rates, and making sure that we have the funds from the state to do that backfill, but also protect those that are in low income or businesses that are basically in arrears because they can no longer afford to pay their utility bills, making sure their utilities do get paid. So that one went faster, but happy to answer any questions.
I don't have any questions on that. I just have a comment that I think calling it low income drinking water / sewer or household water and sewer would really make it a little bit more identifiable. That's all.
This might be a system of, because of the rapidity with which we were naming things, I'll clean that up. Thank you, Chair.
Aaron, the program that we worked with Northwest Natural and PGE was that they were going to basically absorb 10% of the bill and we were going to pay 90% of the bill. That seems to be seems to be a little bit more palatable in that there is some skin in the game for clean water services other than 100%. I get that, but so is there been a conversation with that, or is this money going to pay 100% of the past due bill?
I'm hoping Mark Jockers is available to kind
Sure.
of talk.
Aaron, yes.
Thanks, Mark.
Gonna let you flounder there for a minute. No, thank you. And thank you for that question, Commissioner Willie. We're really looking at what happened last year, right? You helped with the CARES Act funding. That did not have the uptake that we anticipated. I would say only what we heard from Community Action is only about 26% of the people that were eligible for the funding actually sought it. And what we did at that point with each of those water, drinking water and sewer utility bills is wipe out 100% of any arrears they'd had since, I think we had a March 1st date. The challenge is there's still a hole in the budget of the water and sewer utilities. And I'm talking not only to a certain degree, clean water services, we have a broader base. So it's not quite as dramatic for us, but Tuolumne Valley Water District, City of Beaverton, so, the Beaverton Water, Tigard Water, pieces like that. So do we look at how do we help write off that bad debt while also clearing those ratepayers of any obligation there? So I hope that answers it. It is a complicated question.
And if I may,
this does not include the electric and natural gas bills. This is specifically focused on household water and sewer.
Yeah,
Chair, that is correct. Electric and natural gas have a federal program already, the LIHEAP program, where there is funding that goes into that, and there's that separate conversation, as you mentioned before, with PG and Northwest Natural.
And I would also say that public utilities like drinking water and wastewater do sit in a different world than publicly owned and publicly operated utilities like Northwest Natural and PGE. So there's a different consideration that legislators can take up when looking at those public partners like Clean Water Services.
Any other questions, commissioners, on this one? Okay, next ones.
Turn it back to Jajit. Thank you all.
Thank you, Aaron. So this is our 7th and final project for your board's consideration. This is the Cloverleaf project. This is part of our Fairgrounds complex. In 2018, when the Fairgrounds Advisory Board, I hope I got that right, redid their master plan, in phase 1A of that master plan, it indicated that safety and accessibility renovations to the Cloverleaf building were top of the list. And so these, accessibility renovations, remodels, if you will, are going to go to improving access for, ADA folks who are utilizing our restrooms, better access to TriMet in terms of light rail access, the structural upgrades to long-term viability. What we're really talking about here is increasing our seismic resiliency. I don't want to give you the impression that things are crumbling, but if we were to have, say, a Cascadia subduction zone event, this building would likely not survive that. Also, there would be an addition of modern safe concessions and stands, HVAC upgrades, and then also things like lighting, updating the exterior parking and landscaping and things like that. So this really, when I first reached out to Leah about this, our initial estimates were about $2.525 million for this rehab and accessibility renovations, but those were 2019 figures, 2019 dollars. And so we did Jack and I did a bit of math on this and kind of tried to give you an estimate of what it would be in today's dollars. And it's approximately 3.125 million. So when considering this project, I would encourage you to really think of it as 3.125 million, because that's more in accordance with steel prices and lumber prices and costs of doing business in the metropolitan region today in 2021.
So on this one, I think there's a real value in the description that you had in the document that talks about this building traditionally supporting 4-H, because I think that is a value statement that many legislators outside of just those in Hillsborough or whose districts touches Hillsborough will be interested in. I think it's a great project. No further, I don't have any further questions. Rather, I know the master plan talks about other projects, and as you said, this is the phase 1, whatever, 1 point something versus the other ones that are phase 2 and 3. But for the fact that I learned last night from Chair Smith that Clackamas County is moving forward with a new barn at their fairgrounds for this project list, and that multiple state legislators are interested in putting their money into it to get that barn built at the Clackamas County Fairgrounds. And so it caused me to think, after I'd already read this, thinking, well, let's not think too small. I love the idea of putting as many projects on the list for Washington County legislators to consider. So you might look at that master plan list and put another one in that's one of those fairgrounds master plan buildings, if they could end up with a sizable project and build the whole thing. But that's math that the legislators will have to figure out. That's all.
Right. And to your point, Chair, I think one of the reasons why we're seeing a proclivity for certain state legislators to invest in fairground complexes, we saw that these were important places both for wildfire response and COVID, right? And so there's kind of a win-win-win element in these types of investments. That's 3 wins if you caught that. Usually I stick to 2. So if there aren't any other questions,
I have a comment. I have a comment in regard to this one. This Clover
Yes,
Leaf.
Commissioner Rogers.
And it goes along a similar line that you just heard. That this building has been historically used for everything from Boy Scouts, Cub Scouts, knitting, 4-H, garden club,
weddings.
Weddings. I mean, what you have as a description is, and I don't mean to be impolite, but it's really not very appealing. I mean, I'm going, okay, that could be any building in any county, any city, a whole lot of different areas. But if we would embellish it with the types of uses, I mean, it's a multi-purpose building that they're not going to rent the wingspan for. I mean, these are a different kind of venue, have a lot of implications. So I think it's a good project as well. If we would take and say some things, I think that would be touching on the heartstrings of a whole lot of different folks who do different things. So if you could embellish it, I think it would be helpful.
Would the list of projects with the document, would that go to legislators versus just the slides?
So we will not be sending the slides, Chair Harrington. It'll be much more nuanced. We actually have a spreadsheet that we actually were able to receive from Senator Steiner Hayward's office. And Commissioner Rogers, to your point, we will absolutely be embellishing, and we're not even embellishing, we're just telling our story. We're telling what the use case is here, why this is important, and absolutely all those details will be included. I honestly, I didn't have the room on this slide, and if you noticed, I already gave you a paragraph that was probably too dense. Yes, absolutely, we will be including all those facets to make it a more compelling ask.
So you said that was the 7th and final? Can I put another plug in for figuring out a project that would help our various park districts expand the number of bathroom facilities throughout Washington County so that they have sinks and toilets?
I'm more than glad to work.
Remember who, I thought I typed that up and sent it to somebody.
You did. I think it was, you replied to me and a couple other folks on that. So we can certainly work through that with departments and see if we can put together something in short order for your consideration.
Yeah, I don't mean to displace any of these other great projects, but
Okay.
rather looking at what I know I've been hearing across all the jurisdictions in Washington counties during this pandemic. And I think we're going to continue to be living with this virus. And once again, I got stuck on the pandemic. Sorry, I know. I'm supposed to get away from that with this funding. But anyway, it's just an idea. I trust you to deal with it or not.
Okay. I will do my best.
Chair, because are you talking not just for Washington County parks?
Correct.
Yeah.
We have there's THPRD,
Right.
various cities. Some cities do have bathrooms in some of their parks, but they have other highly used parks that only have porta potties and what's that, sanitizer that, they haven't had the benefit of putting in the plumbing and putting in that state kit that's available.
So Chair Harrington, we will definitely look into that. And one of the things I'll also start with is reaching out to our partners in case they're making the same ask, then we can just support it, right? And that would be fantastic.
Yeah.
So definitely great recommendation. Any other questions here?
So do we have the flexibility to just give you the direction that we like these projects and provide them all to the caucus and let them decide what choices they want to make?
Exactly what I'm asking for.
Hooray! Okay.
So let's go to the next slide, if that's okay. So here are all 7 projects with their amounts listed to the next, right? I apologize if that's small. We tried to get the size right, but it looks small once again. So sorry about that. I think the first question is, are there any of these 7 projects that you would not like to see move forward? Okay, fantastic. Now, one of the things that we heard, was there a
Commissioner
question?
Willie?
I can't see all of you.
Maybe.
My apologies.
No, that's okay. Maybe this will come out in the conclusion. So go ahead and continue that, and then I'll respond. Go ahead.
So basically, I'm not hearing any pushback on any of the 7 projects, so it sounds like we're comfortable with moving them forward. One of the things that came out of our caucus meeting on Friday is that, and I forget which legislator said it, it might have been Senator Betsy Johnson, but I don't want to misquote myself or her, or whoever else it was. But the point is that they said that, okay, submit whatever projects you think are great, but then, maybe even just let us know if you have a priority or 2. And again, there's no guidance, there's no emails on this, there's no FAQs. This is something that was thrown out there. I just want to be mindful to that. I don't think it's going to necessarily hurt us to prioritize 1 or 2 or none or 3, however many the board sees fit. But I think just appeasing that sort of soft request would be prudent for us. And if the board can agree on 1 or 2, I think that would be a good positioning for us. Are there any that jump out as a top priority? And if not, that's okay too.
Commissioner Willie, go ahead.
Yeah, could we just, I guess from my standpoint, I would need to take a few minutes and look at this and then weight them 1 to 7. That's what my preference would be. I mean, there's some great projects here, but I need to kind of think through which one I think is of highest value. And again, we're talking about a range of $90,000 to $10 million. So right. it's not like there. I don't know. Anyway, that would be my preference. So that's what I would ask for a 5-minute. Let me noodle through this and prioritize it, and then I don't care what everybody else does, but that's the way I'm going to do it. So
I have a suggestion as well. What you're doing is giving us projects that are spread across several Senate and House districts, and we can't see that on this sheet. And so what the commissioner was saying is, would we iterate them 1 through 7? But we may have 2 or 3 ones simply because we say that fills the need in that particular part of the county. So is there a way that you can stratify these so that, for instance, I'll just pick on one that's down in my home area, that 12 shuttle. Great interest down here, small project, probably less interest in the Cloverleaf, even though that's probably one of my top ones. But that one would ring a bell with representatives out in the Hillsborough area. So are we trying to do something county-wide where different?
Yeah, this is where I'm not gonna do a ranking myself. There are 7 different Senate districts.
Oh boy.
At least that include portions of Washington County. I don't think it's in our best interest to deal with prioritization. That's just the Senate district. So you multiply that by 2 for the representatives, you've got 14, 28 people.
That's 21. That's okay.
Give them the whole buffet. Oh, thank you. I doubled it. Yeah. Give them the whole buffet and let them figure out what portions of the buffet they want to put on their plate.
No, I disagree with that. I think they don't know our projects as well as we know our projects. So I'd be much more inclined to, and I hear the conversation about 7 Senate districts and 14 rep. I mean, this is due tomorrow or today. What is it?
Due tomorrow at close of business, Commissioner Willie.
Yeah. So
And I will
I'm not
say
willing
too,
to get into that kind of weeds, but
we are going to submit, of course, like Jajit mentioned, the spreadsheet, and that will, we will be assigning these projects to the particular Senate and House districts. So if you think about it, the county could prioritize, but then we're still sort of sending the 7 off to different places, if that makes sense, because they're for different districts. So I think it's kind of fine either way. That's just my perspective. But we'll make it clear to the legislature where these are located.
I mean, we've got legislators that they may not be that interested in water, for example, such as Representative Helm is, but some of them are nurses and doctors. So they might look at things that we ordinarily wouldn't anticipate for them to be interested in. That's why I think we need to be a little careful.
And if I may, Chair Harrington, I know that the math looks really good with 7 senators and 14 representatives. We did also hear from some folks that because they represent large swaths of counties, we had contemplated through LUT putting forward something related to the Salmonberry Trail, but we have since heard from Senator Johnson, Representative Witt, and Representative Weber, who all represent out there. They've already allocated their $8 million to everybody, to the counties outside of Washington County. And so we can balance. The number isn't that clean cut. We've got, however, a math that Commissioner Rogers will fix if I try to do out loud. So yep. I think we can get away with not ranking, but it does help if there is something that we can point to for a member who's contemplating between county-wide services or not. But not every of the $4 million, for example, in Representative Wagner's district is going to come to Washington County.
I understand, but I'm not going to take the bait.
And to be clear, right, we were not asked to prioritize. This was a really off-the-cuff suggestion by a legislator, honestly, in the heat of a moment with 30 other people on a call. So I want to just let you know how much credence I'm putting into that. And that's why I'm sort of posing this as an optional thing, right? I'm not sure how much weight it carries, but I do tend to gravitate towards the chair's opinion on this.
Why let the thought of one divide the 5 of us?
Correct.
Not sure I understood that.
One person asked for it, and you're asking for a ranking that could divide the 5 of us with 5 different opinions on prioritization.
Okay, let's do
I'm
the
just
top
not
4 and the
interested
bottom
in
3.
negotiating with ourselves, that's all.
I don't think we're negotiating with ourselves. I think we're giving them direction.
If one or more of you want to prioritize, knock yourselves out.
So you're going to submit a list of 7 to 21 different people and hope that you get the results that you want.
It's free money.
You don't have a preference of any of these projects? They're all equally weighted? Seriously?
You know, they're all doing math for themselves, right? A whole lot of the reps are, think about who's up for re-election next May. They're doing math that we are not even thinking about.
I understand.
All the best available data that we can give them. Make them the most informed people we can make them.
Jerry, tell me your thoughts, because you're a very thoughtful guy and usually thinks things out, but I've always been inclined to throw a whole bunch of them out unless they, as a group, say they want us rating, and then I'm all for rating. But in this case, tell me what your thinking is. It's going to help inform somebody, for instance, Rachel down in my neck of the woods. If she likes that Tualatin shuttle and you don't include it in your top 7, I think she'll do something different. But I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Well, I just think that there are some of these projects that are higher priority or are more critical to our county services than others. So, and I happen to like the shuttle, and I just jotted down my top 4 and not ranking them, and just jotted down my top 4. And one is in Tigard, one is in Tualatin. Clean Water Services covers the entire county, and the other one is in Hillsborough. And so I thought, well, okay. But again, so I just think you don't ask, you don't get. We're asking, we're throwing out 7 options there, and crossing our fingers that we'll get the best of the bunch, picked by 21 people who don't know the county as well as we do.
But nothing's going to stop all the cities from contributing their own lists as well. So we're not the only ones delivering lists.
And Commissioner Willie, if I may, one thing to think about is that if let's assume we don't prioritize hypothetically, if there's one project that is truly a priority for you, I think in your own right as commissioner, that's something that we could easily support through lobbying or working with legislators. Just throwing that option out there.
And I'll just suggest one approach too, if I may as well. This is Paige, that we put, we can put all 7 forward and say that these are 7 issue areas or projects that our board identified as priorities for them, right? So that they are all priorities. And then I think that what we will do, I off the top of my head, I do not think any of these projects are in the same district, right? I think we're sending 7 projects to 7 different Senate districts. So we'll make sure that we can make sure that they are all billed as priorities, because it's not like we're sending, the Tualatin shuttle and the Clean Water Services project to one district for them to pick and choose, whereas your board did not pick and choose for them. But I think since we're just giving one option from the county to each of those districts, we can easily say that your board identified 7 priorities and try to work it that way too. But happy to defer to whatever the board decides to do.
I hear a proposal to just advance all 7. Commissioner Treese,
I support that proposal.
Commissioner Fry, we haven't heard from you yet. Okay,
I support that proposal. They're all one of
I wasn't suggesting we don't submit all 7. I was suggesting we prioritize the 7.
yep, I understand. And
Okay, so your requested vote is similar to mine. I'd say yes to that because I'm saying we put all 7 out there. So add without prioritization on it, and then you'll get your votes and we'll move on.
so Commissioner Willie, you've put a proposal out there. I've waited for others to say, yes, let's go ahead and do a prioritization. And I just haven't heard that. So I'm just
Okay.
looking at the time, trying to get us to wrap up. That's all.
Okay. I think we should prioritize, but let the majority rule, submit all 7 of them.
Three of us are ready to be done and move on. Was there something else the 2 we haven't heard from would like to suggest instead?
I have one question, and it has nothing to do with this. We're only talking about the county side. As our clean water hat, are we submitting a separate list, even though it's in the same list? Are we going to have 2 sets of letters, one that comes from Clean Water saying, here's our priorities? Because they're a separate government. And I know the cities are doing this and the special districts. So should we be doing that as well? And so 2 of the, or maybe more, would come off this list. I don't know how it's going to be presented. So
Essentially, Commissioner Rogers, we would present them, they have a spreadsheet. We're going to fill out the spreadsheet and identify the receiving organization for those that are Clean Water Services to receive the funding. We would put Clean Water Services. It's the same team, like all 3 of us represent Clean Water Services as well as the county. So we aren't necessarily writing a letter. We're submitting the project details that they've asked for, and we will identify those that are Clean Water Services and where their projects cover. Does that answer your question?
it does. I always like to rank like Commissioner Willie likes, but in this particular case, there's just too many players. I mean, it's too confusing. So, yeah, I understand. Ready to move forward.
Great. So sounds like government relations will be advancing all 7 on behalf of your board in the county. So thank you for that. Board clerk, next slide, please. Finally, thank you. I know government relations, we have been asking for emergency meetings, extra work sessions. We've been tasking all of our county departments, Clean Water Services and subject matter staff with federal processes, state processes, bill reviews, and all of that. And so we just wanted to thank you for lending an ear and working with us through us, because what does this allow us to do? It allows us to serve our communities in a more meaningful way. If we can secure these resources, that's what we're doing. And in partnership, I think we're doing well, and I think that we're working towards the right goals. So thank you.
You entertain, are we going to talk about the legislature for a couple minutes, or can we?
Absolutely, sure.
Can you just remind me of the next milestone?
May 19th is when we have revenue forecast. Aaron Doyle, do you know when the second chamber deadline is?
The deadline to schedule a work session in the second chamber, and also the deadline to schedule work sessions for the Joint Transportation Committee, is May 13th. The deadline by which to have that work session held is May 18th, I believe, and I will fact check myself and correct myself if I'm wrong later. So those are rapidly approaching big policy conversations. However, everything through Joint Ways and Means that's in rules or revenue still survives after those deadlines. But that's the next big one. And then a revenue forecast will really get the Ways and Means process moving forward, as well as ARPA guidance and checks.
It's going to be June before I know it. So that's why I figured I'd better ask the beginning of May. So, okay.
And we will see you all next week as well.
Yeah, okay. Keep up the good work. You're a great government relations team working well with Washington County staff and Clean Water Services staff. Really thrilled. Thank you very much. So that's it for the agenda topics today. The governor's office still hasn't released the press release with regard to county status on the, I'll use the right word, the risk level chart. They're now looking at data day to day, apparently, but the OHA email came out moments ago, and our case numbers reported today are 148, which is quite a position compared to yesterday's wonderful 1. So I think things are proceeding as we thought they were this morning. And they don't know when they're going to have the press release done yet still. So an interesting Tuesday. Anything else? We covered a lot of ground today, a lot of different topics. Go team, go. See ya Friday in our budget committee meeting. See ya.